Welcome to the start of an exciting learning journey. This course will be an important part of your development as a coach, but not the only element. Like many other forms of personal and professional learning, coaching requires determined practice and intentional reflection. On the one hand, by the time you have completed this course, watched the related video clips and completed the suggested assignments, you will be ready to coach others and use a coaching approach in any of your professional or personal roles. On the other hand, learning the coaching way of being, discussed later in this course, is the endeavor of a lifetime. By embarking on your own learning journey, it is very likely that you will inspire others to do the same. In our first lesson today, we will kick off by looking at a model for coaching that will assist you with a structure in your following coaching conversations. My name is Marianne. I am a registered coach and coach trainer in Cape Town, South Africa. What you will walk away with from lesson 1 is gaining an overview of coaching, a model to raise awareness and responsibility in others, and being able to use the GROW model as a process for your next coaching conversation. Let's start with the first objective of this lesson, an overview of coaching. The life-enhancing benefits of being a coach can have a huge impact on your professional and personal life, be it exploring coaching to further develop your ability to help others or a quest for a sense of purpose. Becoming a coach changes you and your relationships for the better. Coaching is rewarding and satisfying. It is an opportunity to make a difference and see firsthand the impact on other people's lives and a chance to give something back. Coaching strengthens relationships. Throughout the process, coaches make fundamental connections with those they support as they share their sense of accomplishment and success. Coaching accelerates personal growth and development. As people learn from each other, so the coaches also learn at a rapid pace too. Supporting others is an excellent way in which to maintain individual professional development. Coaching expands professional networks and communities. Whether running your own company or working for an organization, success as a commercial coach often lies within the ability to develop personal and professional networks. These networks quickly widen and provide numerous opportunities to engage an audience. As coaching can be carried out wherever you live, over the telephone or with the use of Skype or Zoom, actual geographical location is flexible. A coaching practice is portable and gives freedom to live and work where you want. Training to become a coach can take as little as 12 months, and it's up to each individual to decide the pace of study. This course is a stepping stone in your coaching career. You can use this as a foundation in becoming a practitioner coach. This course is aligned to the ICF, which is the International Coaching Federation's gold standard of coaching competencies, making you well equipped for any practitioner course you wish to embark on from here. So there you have it, some benefits of becoming a coach. I hope this enticed you into sticking around with me on this journey. It is also important to understand some of the benefits for being coached. There is an improved sense of direction and focus when being coached. Also, an accelerated learning around a distinct topic, for example, managing people, relationship, influence, etc. And an improved performance in any given area that you choose. There's also an increased knowledge of yourself. There's an improved personal effectiveness, for example, more focused effort on priorities. There's increased motivation or a sense of personal engagement. And increased resourcefulness or resilience, for example, the ability to handle change better. Sir John Whitmore advocated that coaching was all about developing or raising two things in the client: their level of awareness and their level of responsibility. As he said, "If I give you my advice and it fails, you will blame me. I've traded my advice for your responsibility, and that is seldom a good deal." Coaching is a conversational process, thus, and a set of easily learned techniques, so I want to encourage you. The skills needed to be a coach you possess already. The ability to listen to others, to ask questions, and to summarize. From here onwards, it is simply a case of honing those skills in order to effectively facilitate thought-provoking, one-to-one conversations with others. Considering that you are attending this course, it is likely that you already possess an essential and necessary attribute: a desire to support others to achieve more of their potential. And yet, this simplicity does not prevent coaching from being a powerful and rewarding activity. In some cases, it can even be life-changing for you as well as the client. The second objective of our lesson today is looking at a model to raise awareness and responsibility in others. Any course on coaching would not be complete without reference to the most famous coaching model, the GROW model. The model was originally developed in the 1980s by business coaches Graham Alexander, Alan Fine, and Sir John Whitmore. They developed a coaching process which was to transform the profession. Simple, but not simplistic. The GROW model will be presented in this course as a framework for your coaching practice. The GROW coaching model is a tried and tested coaching model to structure coaching conversations. It is important at this stage to emphasize that the GROW model is one coaching process out of many that are now available for coaches. We will unpack the other models as well as adaptations to the GROW model later on in Module 2. So for now, let's look at what does GROW mean. GROW is an acronym derived from the 4 words representing the different stages of the conversational process: goal, reality, options, and way forward, or will. The power of the GROW coaching model is that it leads to a clearly defined end result through 4 phases. The client is personally active in identifying problems and generating ideas for solutions. This means that anything that comes out of the coaching session has a lot of chance to stick. The GROW coaching model is about learning through experience. It's reflection, insight, making choices, and pursuing them. The success of a coaching process with the GROW model also depends on the time and energy invested into the process by the client. Did you know? The GROW model was originally developed in the 1980s by business coaches. It was originally devised as a behavioral coaching model. This means that the process was created to support conversations about behavioral change, helping clients to do something differently. However, the GROW model lends itself to cognitive behavioral approaches as well. In other words, helping people to think as well as act differently. The cognitive behavioral aspect of coaching will be discussed later in this module in Lesson 8. You might ask, how does GROW work? The beauty about working with the GROW coaching model is that you don't need to be an expert in your client's specific situation to be able to coach him. The GROW coaching model offers a framework with general questions to elicit goals, obstacles, options, and more without ever needing to offer advice or force any particular direction. In a sense, the coach provides a dynamic vehicle for his client's development. If you use the GROW process, there are certain stages that should be followed. Each of these is listed below, with questions which capture the general focus of each stage. First up is the goal stage. And the main question in the goal stage is, what would you like to achieve? Next up is the reality stage. The main question within the reality stage is, what is the current situation in relation to what you have identified as a goal? Next up is the options stage. And the main question in the options stage is, what options can you think of that will help you to move closer to your goal or overcome obstacles? And lastly, the last stage is the will stage or the way forward. And the main question in that stage is, what will you do as a result of this coaching session? So there you have it, a quick overview of how the GROW model works. According to John Whitmore, coaching should raise the client's awareness about their situation and should instill a sense of personal responsibility. In other words, a client should be supported to view their situation differently so that they realize they are able to move towards their goals. Remember, the two intentions of every coaching conversation is, firstly, raising the awareness of the client, and secondly, encouraging the client to now take personal responsibility of what they have become aware of. So awareness is raised in the goal and reality stages. And according to Whitmore, awareness is gathering and clearly perceiving the relevant facts and information, and the ability to determine what is relevant. So the client's awareness is raised in three ways. Firstly, by identifying the gap between where they would like to be, the goal, and where they currently are, reality. This provides the client with a better understanding of what may be needed to move forward. Secondly, the reality stage focuses the client's attention on relevant information about the present in relation to the desired goal. Usually, new insights can emerge simply by talking about what is already happening. And thirdly, the coach's questions, active listening, summarizing and paraphrasing can help the client to view the current reality from a more objective standpoint. Remember, awareness is created by looking at the gap between the current reality and your goal. In the latter two stages, options and way forward or will, the client is encouraged to take personal responsibility for working towards their goals. Whitmore points out that responsibility is necessary for high achievement. When we truly accept, choose, or take responsibility for our thoughts and our actions, our commitment to them rises, and so does our performance. This is one of the reasons that it is important for the client to identify possible obstacles that is standing in the gap of their goal, and then to identify plausible options to address these obstacles before selecting a specific and explicit way forward. The client should also commit to a self-selected action as a result of the coaching session. A tip. As we will explore later in Module 3 when we discuss the coaching way of being, one important aspect of encouraging the client to take responsibility is for the coach not to take responsibility for finding solutions or generating new ideas at all. Before we move on to our third and final topic for this lesson, let me give you a glimpse of what is to come in the next lesson. Lesson 2 is about the first of our core coaching skills, listening to encourage thinking. This is the ability to focus completely on what the client is saying and is not saying, to understand the meaning of what is said in the context of the client's desires, and to support the client's self-expression. This is so important, we put it at the top of the list of coaching skills. You can't be a good coach unless you really listen well. Note, it doesn't just mean listening to what is being said. It also means listening to what is not being said. This is where you can really help your client by asking insightful questions about what you noticed might be going on for them. See you there. Our third and last objective of the day is delving deeper into the GROW coaching model, so you are able to use it as a model for your next coaching conversation. Let's look at understanding and using the GROW model as a conversational process. To put it metaphorically, the GROW coaching model is what you need to plan a journey. You start with a map, where you are going, the goal, and where you are coming from, the reality. It then charts the different routes and modes of transportation, the options. At last, it helps you pick the option that suits you best while still considering the obstacles on the way. You then chart out the process and make sure that your motivation for the trip is maximized. So let's jump into how to start a coaching session. Firstly, let's look at before the session. That is the pre-coaching discussion. It can be in person or over the telephone, and it is usually 10 to 20 minutes. This is an opportunity for you to introduce yourself to the client, agree a time and place for the first meeting, and get an idea of the topic. Coaching sessions tend to last between 30 minutes and 2 hours. We start off with some small talk to build rapport, which is 5 minutes. And the coach initiates a discussion which is unrelated to the coaching topic in order to put the client at ease and start the process of building rapport. In the UK, for example, people like to talk about the weather. So there's a tip. And then getting to know one another. That can take between 5 to 10 minutes. It can be helpful for the coach to introduce yourself briefly. This is a good time also to find out a little bit more about what the client does on a day-to-day basis, regardless of whether this relates directly to the coaching conversation. This is also the right time to perhaps agree on a contract about how the coaching will proceed and how coaching works, like educating them around coaching. The importance of contracting, especially during the first coaching session, is covered again in Module 2. So let us consider the GROW model now as a process, looking briefly at each stage. The first step in the GROW coaching model is defining the goal of the coaching process. That includes long-term, the central theme of the process, and short-term, the goal for every session. As researchers found that goals that are stretching and achievable can lead to high performance. If a goal is too easy, it is no longer motivating. So that people can tell when they have achieved their goals, it is also helpful if those goals are measurable, that is, outcome goals. And finally, and perhaps most significantly for coaches, it has been suggested that goals should be self-selected. Studies have shown that people are more committed to goals which they have chosen to pursue, rather than goals which are imposed by others. The coach should support the client to identify an overall goal or theme and aspiration for coaching, as well as the goal for the coaching conversation of each session or today. And setting goals should take about 10 to 20 minutes. It is crucial to recognize that different types of goals should be discussed and agreed during this stage, especially if it's the first time that you meet with the client. The first is the overall goal. It's the aspiration or the end goal. Usually, it is this goal that provides the motivation for coaching. The performance goal, things to do to move closer to the end goal. And the outcome goal. It's to achieve during each coaching conversation. Now, let's look at each one more closely. The first is the theme, or the overall goal or aspiration that has brought the client to coaching. In other words, what does the client hope to achieve by being coached? Whitmore calls this an end goal. And usually, it is this goal that provides the motivation and is a long-term goal and the theme of the entire process. Here's a few tips of questions to identify aspirations. What has brought you to coaching? What are your aspirations? And what are you building towards? Let's use an example. My client, Susan. She comes for coaching because she is overwhelmed at work with all her tasks, which builds up and negatively influences her relationships and her enjoyment of her work. With some of the above questions of what she rather like to aspire to at work, she might get to an end goal of rather being calm and assertive instead. And the second goal, which is the topic of the coaching conversation, should focus on what the client would like to do to move closer to the end goal. Whitmore terms this a performance goal. This should be perceived as something that the client is able to achieve, or is at least within their control. And here are some questions to identify these performance goals, which usually is only done by the beginning of a coaching process. Firstly, what would you like to be different as a result of these coaching conversations? What is it you would like to achieve? And just what are your goals? For example, our client Susan, after some of the above questions, she gets to realizing that in order to move closer to that calm and assertive aspiration that she has, she will have to be able to prioritize, delegate, or even not taking up some of the tasks on her plate at all. Recognizing that her performance goals might be around saying no, greater self-awareness around why she struggles with no, and speaking up and allowing herself to have a voice. Finally, it is important for coaches to clarify what the client would like to achieve during each coaching conversation. It may be helpful to distinguish this goal by calling it an outcome of each following coaching conversation. This should be very specific. The coach has an interest in ensuring that this outcome is achievable within the given time constraints. Here are some questions to help identifying outcomes for the session. What would you like to achieve within our time together today? What is your desired outcome of this conversation? Or what would you like to achieve during this coaching conversation? For example, our client Susan, after some of the above questions, might need to choose which of the performance goals she wants to tackle first. She might start with the most pressing one, the not saying no. And to get to an outcome goal, we want to ask her what an outcome would be if we focus on saying no. She might recognize that for her to be able to say no, she will have to deal with her fear of the person's reaction when she says no to them. The goal becomes something like moving into strong self-confidence within herself. And now we have a good outcome goal. That will greatly assist in how the rest of our conversation with Grow will go. Remember, if you don't pin the goal well, you will row around for the rest of the session. Another thing that's very important when setting goals is formulating it positively. It is about what the client wants to achieve, not what they don't want. Remember that what you focus on increases. So when you focus on not doing something, all you think about is that thing, and it will increase because that is how our brains work. So for example, don't focus on stop procrastinating, rather on achieve a daily discipline. So with our client Susan, in the example above, where she recognizes her fear of saying no, we moved her from formulating it negatively, like don't want to fear somebody's response, to formulating it positively, growing in confidence in herself. Another example would be that often people come to coaching with a problem statement. We want to assist through good questioning to formulate a positive goal by getting the end goal and focus to be around what the outcome is when the problem does not exist anymore. With our client Susan, we can ask questions like, how do you respond when you do not fear the other person's response? The outcome would lead her to see or experience herself as the person with confidence and not fear, causing it to become a positive, formulated goal. I hope that helped. The reality stage allows the client to clarify the current situation, and it might take between 5 to 10 minutes. This is the part of the conversation in which the client should be doing most of the talking. This creates an opportunity for you as coach to strengthen your relationship with the client by demonstrating active listening and empathy. The coach should ensure that the client focuses on their current reality in relation to the goal that they will have identified earlier. The above goal and current reality stages can swap around or jump between each other. Make notes as it will help you to keep track. Tip: as a novice coach, it may be helpful to focus your attention on listening to the client rather than trying to understand the situation in order to offer a solution. This is a common trap as many of us are trained to listen for problems to try to identify solutions. In fact, many novice coaches report that having the answer can get in the way of genuine listening. For example, with our client Susan, we want to now allow her to unpack her reality of all her tasks and her inability to say no and not having a voice. It is a time for us to observe, listen, and empathize with the challenges she is facing, regardless whether you think it is challenging or not. Effective and experienced coaches may seem to be just listening during the reality stage, but they are actually doing much more in the background. Let's look at what that is. Demonstrating active listening, asking open questions, avoiding leading questions, being aware of the process, ensuring an appropriate focus on the goal, listening for the facts, noticing emotions, and observing body language. Let's have a look at each of these skills. The first attribute is demonstrating active listening. This skill will be covered in detail in Lesson 2. It is in the reality stage that it can make the most significant impact. Instead of listening to come up with an answer, the experienced coach will listen to create a thoughtful space for the client. Even more important than listening in this way is to demonstrate that you are listening actively through your attitude and behaviors. A good question to ask yourself when reflecting on your practice is not how well did I listen, but what evidence did I provide to the client that I was listening? This kind of respectful listening has the added and powerful effect of allowing the client to feel valued and appreciated. The skills of asking powerful questions will be covered more in Lesson 3. But the reality stage is primarily an opportunity for the client to share their experiences. Remember, this is the stage where the coach should do the least talking. Having said that, an experienced coach will ensure that most interventions are presented as open questions, as these encourage further reflection and exploration. A good question to ask yourself when evaluating your own practice is, how did my questions help the client to do their best thinking? Leading questions have no place in effective coaching conversations. In many ways, these leading questions are manipulative and insinuating how the coach believes the client should behave. A good coach will first notice that they are asking leading questions and then stop themselves from asking such questions. And with time and with the appropriate coaching way of being, which we will discuss in Model 3, the desire to suggest ways forward using leading questions will diminish. 2 good questions to ask yourself when reflecting on your practice are, did I ask any leading questions? And what do I have to change so that I am not seeking to find solutions for the client? Remember that you are likely to be disempowering clients if you are trying to tell them what they should do. The GROW model is one process of many. However, a coach should keep a process in mind while coaching. While it is presented in a linear fashion, the GROW model is actually cyclical and flexible. Often, the client may want to return to the goal stage to refine their goal. At other times, the coach may need to return to the goal stage to renegotiate the focus of the conversation with the client. At all times, the experienced coach will be aware of where the conversation is in relation to the GROW process. The process is the coach's responsibility. So, depending on the length of the session, the coach should be thinking about how much time should be spent on each stage. The reality stage is the client's opportunity to offload or paint a picture of what things are like for them. The coach's role is to listen attentively and also to ensure that there is a link between the context that is described and the goal that has been selected. A good way of doing this is to ask the client about the relevance of what they are talking about. For example, with our client Susan, you can ask, how does this relate to your goal of strong confidence? Often there is a relationship and it is helpful for the client to verbalize this. At other times, the client may realize that she has pursued another avenue of thinking that does not relate directly to the selected goal. At this point, it is helpful for the coach to reflect back to the client that there is a disconnect between what is being discussed and her stated goal. The client can either refocus on the original goal or else select a different goal as the topic for the coaching conversation. In these situations, it is important to explicitly renegotiate this with the client. For example, with our client Susan, you can say, it sounds like you have identified another goal. Shall we set the original goal of self-confidence to one side and spend our time talking about this new goal of a need for meaningful work instead? And during the reality stage, a coach should remain alert for statements that are presented as facts. For our purposes, we will define a fact as a statement or observation that is verifiable. For example, these could be facts. I was born in 1982. My company employs 240 people. There are only 3 other people involved in the applications process. This type of information can theoretically be verified by checking with other sources of data. However, other statements may be presented as facts when they are in actual fact not. Like, no one in my team will ever support that initiative. In my organization, you will not get promoted unless you are one of the boss's favorites. People are motivated by self-interest. Each of these statements can be presented as facts when they are actually beliefs or assumptions. This becomes a problem when the so-called fact limits the client or gets in the way of what she wants to achieve. We will cover limiting beliefs in more detail in Module 2. And during the coaching conversation, the coach has an opportunity to listen carefully in order to gather information about emotions that the client may be experiencing. This can be done by making a mental or physical note of any mentions of emotions during the conversation, but also by noticing the client's posture, body language, and mood. The reality stage is an ideal setting for the client to reflect on the situation that they are in and often a chance to talk about how they are feeling about this. If the client does not mention emotions at all, the coach could ask, for instance, how do you feel about this situation? Helping the client to identify how they feel about the gap between their goal and their current reality can be the core purpose of the conversation during the reality stage. Noticing the client's body language is another way of keeping our minds busy so that we do not spend our mental energy trying to solve things for the client. Much has been written about body language, and this will also be discussed in more detail in Module 2. Often the most helpful way to use observations about body language is to share them with the client. Saying, for instance, I noticed that you were very animated when you talked about the possibility of leading the finance team. You were sitting up straight and using your hands when describing your ideas. This is one way of demonstrating that you are being attentive, that can support the client to raise their levels of self-awareness. At the same time, the client can correct any misinterpretations of body language. While it is good practice to notice the body language of a client, the coach may also benefit from being mindful about their own nonverbal communication. Nodding is helpful, but overdoing it can have a negative effect. Excessive nodding can make the client feel rushed. Leaning backward in a chair may help the coach's posture, but may imply a lack of interest in what the client is saying. Generally speaking, an open, relaxed body posture is most appropriate. Here are some sample questions for the reality stage. Remember, you can find all these questions in your course materials. What is happening at the moment? How do others perceive this situation? What are the benefits of the situation? What is getting in the way of resolving the situation? How similar is this to situations you have faced before? What feedback have you had about the current situation? What do you do really well? What have you achieved already? So, for example, with our client Susan, we want her now to unpack about her lack in self-confidence. All the tasks that she appreciates herself for tackling, her inability to say no, and even the fear she has of others' reactions when she says no. All regardless whether you think it is that bad or not. It is not for us to judge. Let's continue. The option stage is the one that should be led mostly by the client. Again, paradoxically, it is also the time when coaches will have to work the hardest. By now, the client's goals should be clear and the current reality will have been discussed. There is likely to be a gap between what the client hopes to achieve and where they perceive themselves to be at the present moment. Let's look at the 2 ways in which you can work through the option stage. Firstly is generating options, and secondly is evaluating options. Let's look at each one in more detail. Generating options or exploring options can take between 10 to 15 minutes. At this point, the client should be encouraged to think about ways of moving closer to their goal by generating as many options as possible. Tools and techniques for helping the client to think creatively are discussed in Module 2. It is important for the coach to push the client to identify as many options as possible. It has been suggested that the quantity of options is more important at this stage than the quality and feasibility of each one. In some cases, a client can change their self-perception from victim, I have no control, to victor, I can choose my own destiny, simply by realizing that they have a number of options. For example, our client Susan. She may realize that she is able to say no, and that perhaps the reaction might not even be all that bad. With appreciating the enormous amount of tasks she tackles, she might recognize the option of seeing her value and that she has the power to say no, because she adds a great deal of value with her skill and experience. She realizes the options of delegating and even requesting redistribution of tasks from the start. Evaluating or selecting options should take between 2 to 5 minutes. Once some options have been identified, the coach should work with the client to evaluate them. While having a number of choices can be empowering, too many choices can be overwhelming. The evaluation criteria should be selected by the client. In other words, the client should decide how they will choose the best option to pursue. Sometimes this can be done by asking the client which option is the simplest to implement, the most likely to result in positive outcome, or the most desirable one. At other times, it may be more helpful to go down the list of options, assessing the pros and cons of each. There will also be occasions when a more structured process feels appropriate. In this case, the client can create a grid identifying some criteria to apply to each option and could then rate each criterion on a scale of 1 to 10. Some examples. Go try and see what works best. Here are some sample questions in the option stage. What are your options? What could you do? What else could you do? If you could do anything, what would you do? If you were to advise a friend who faced the same situation, what would you suggest? What could really unlock the situation for you? How would someone you really admire deal with this situation? What is your heart telling you? What is your head telling you? For example, our client Susan. She might now choose to start saying no with her newfound appreciation of her abilities, as well as speaking up to her manager about perhaps redistributing her tasks. She might choose to even say no in the moment when someone else asks her to do something. And then she must just make sure that she empathizes and speak about the fear she has of their dislike of her, especially when they are upset with her after saying no. The important thing is that she remembers it is a higher priority to her to say no than to avoid a negative reaction. And lastly, the will stage, also called the way forward. At this stage, the client should be encouraged to commit to their next steps and can be using the SMART objectives. The SMART acronym stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. Using this acronym will help the client to set realistic, easily measurable tasks before the next coaching session. Please see your lesson notes for a detailed unpacking of SMART goals. There is 2 parts essentially to the will or wrap-up stage. First is committing to some action. That might take 2 to 10 minutes. In this part, the coach should encourage the client to commit to some actions that have emerged out of the coaching conversation based on the options selected earlier. Some clients like to develop an action plan that can be monitored, like the SMART objectives. Wrapping up or discussing how the coaching session went can take about 5 minutes. This is the final stage and is a review of the coaching session, with an opportunity for the client to give the coach some feedback. It is helpful at this point to reconfirm arrangements for the next coaching conversation as well. The will stage is thus the last stage of the growth process. Now that the client has selected the options they wish to pursue, it is simply a case of checking for levels of commitment and agreeing on an action plan. Let's look at the 2 ways to work through the will stage in more detail to follow. Firstly, assessing intention to act, and secondly, assessing their readiness. If we accept that behavioral coaching is all about supporting a person to change how they act in order to help them achieve their goals, then being able to assess their intention to act is a necessary skill for coaches. Through a combination of what a client says, the emotions they express, and information gathered from their body language, the experienced coach is able to make informed judgments about how likely they are to proceed with an action that they have identified. For example, if our client Susan is engaged throughout the session, sits forward when deciding what needs to happen, and is perhaps avidly writing down notes about her next steps, her intention to act may be perceived as high. On the other hand, if Susan looks despondent throughout, has her arms perhaps crossed, refuses to write anything, and spends most of her time perhaps looking down at her feet, it is not likely that she will proceed with any action that is agreed. Ultimately, it is important to know whether a client will undertake the actions that they have identified, but a subjective assessment of intention to act can sometimes encourage the coach to check a client's level of commitment. If there is a discrepancy between the level of commitment and the proposed task, the coach can either work with the client to raise the level of commitment or ask them to select a less challenging task. It is important that the client leaves the coaching conversation motivated and hopeful that they will be able to achieve the task that they have set for themselves. Throughout the conversation, and especially during the will or way forward stage, coaches should be considering the readiness of their clients. In other words, using all of the information available, like the body language, mood, what is said, etc., the coach should consider how open the client is to address the topic or issue that is under discussion. Here are some sample questions for the will stage. What could you do? What should you do? What will you do? These 3 questions really go well together. What is the first step that should be taken? Or, how will you know that you have succeeded? What will happen if you achieve this objective? Or, what will not happen if you achieve this objective? Or, how committed are you to the actions that you have identified on a scale of 1 to 10? For example, our client Susan. She is now motivated to have a discussion with her manager the next day, if she is able, as well as prepare herself mentally to say no to the coworker that she wants to start saying no to. She has written down some motivational quotes to herself and will be accountable to a friend who also works with her in order to carry out her plan. For our listen challenge, have a conversation according to this GROW model. And please tell us about your experience. Over decades of research, writers and academics in the field of counseling and coaching have invested significant effort in trying to show that a particular approach is more effective than another. This has not yet been proven, so we can tentatively work on the assumption that there is no one coaching process that is the right one. However, it has been shown that a coach's belief in their chosen process has a significant impact on the perceived success of the coaching partnership. While you have the choice to select a preferred coaching model or even create your own, there are 2 key points that should be kept in mind. A coaching conversation must follow a process. And secondly, the purpose of coaching is to support goal setting and attainment. Remember, at heart, coaching is an interaction that supports people to achieve goals. In a sense, the desire to achieve something, overcome a barrier, or fulfill an ambition is what brings people to coaching. So this concludes your first lesson for this course. Congratulations on taking your first steps into the field of coaching. In our next lesson, we will look at our first core coaching skill, listening to encourage thinking. See you there.